to the Inkwell Exchange. So glad to have you here. I've got two wonderful guests for everyone. This one's a little different, as you can tell. We're taped. But also, I'm so excited to bring these two writers to all of you to share their experiences, particularly their experiences with faith in writing and how faith plays a role in their works and in their pieces. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to Angela and Maiya to introduce themselves, and then we'll circle back to me, and I'll kick us off with a couple of questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellisa. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Angela Thorne. I am a wife and a mother of two kids. My husband and I have been married 6 years, together 9. I've got a 10-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. That is my main focus and job. However, I do have a professional side of me as well. I wear many, many hats, as you'll find out throughout this conversation, I'm sure. So I won't spend too much time on all those things. But my primary passion is advocating and being an activist in the anti-trafficking space. I am a survivor of sex trafficking, child exploitation, and abuse. So I use my experiences of enduring the abuse, but also my experiences coming out of that and using my creativity to bring and shed light on the darkest places that are here in this world. And the main driver behind that is my faith. And I know the Lord genuinely guides me in all that I do. And He has created me with a purpose to use the art specifically to reach people. So I'm excited to share some of that during this conversation.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Maiya Lewis. I'm born and raised in Dallas, Texas. As far as my profession, I've been working in engineering for a little over 10 years. And creatively, I am a poet and spoken word artist. And so, as we'll talk a little bit more later, this is really my artistic expression as a form of ministry. So my faith plays a huge role in what I do, in my writing, in my speaking. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to be here with you all.
Thank you both so much. As hopefully some of you who aren't new here know, I'm Ellisa Brown. I'm the author of the children's book, Meet Cairo, Bold, the Brown, and Beautiful. It's a book about my puppy. I do spoken word. I do this. In my 9 to 5, I work in PR. So every way you can think of words, I do it. And so I have created the Inkwell Exchange to pull together some of the wonderful writers and spoken word artists and authors that I have found, particularly in the DFW, but also based in other places, to talk about their work, their writing processes, because I learned so much from them, and it felt like a crime to keep that knowledge and experience and, just joy all to myself. So I'm going to kick us off with the questions that I know were burning for me, especially when I met these two beautiful women. How did you get started writing?
I'll go first. I pretty much remember writing the first time or finding my passion for writing poetry in the 4th grade. Perhaps 5th grade. It's kind of fuzzy. I'm not sure, but whatever grade, I'm pretty sure it's 5th actually, because it's when 9/11 happened. And I remember that our English teacher had us enter into a competition, a poetry competition, and a specific poem talking about our experiences through 9/11. And I wrote mine, and it ended up getting chosen to be published in this book that we were competing to be in. So that really sparked my joy for poetry and also made me realize my talent for writing. And really, I just dug in at that time in my life, through my experiences, as I've already shared, it died. That passion died for a very long time, throughout my teens and early adult life, um, until I found the Lord again in 2018. And even then, it was still pretty much dead, I would say, till 2020. Um, I was going through deep healing and found my passion for it again. He started having me write poetry again, um, healing through writing poetry. And all of my works during that time were specifically about my childhood trauma. And I was just writing poems expressing my pain and the anguish that I experienced. And it was so healing. So I would say my whole life, but that's not all the way true. So my early life, and then in the last 3 years.
Thanks for sharing that, Angela. For me, for as long as I can remember, I've always leaned towards writing. It's always been, even when I was young and I was in school, my favorite subjects were English and Spanish. Like, I always excelled in those subjects. So I've always had just a passion for writing, for reading, for languages, all of that sort of thing. But I didn't start writing poetry until college. And so in that particular season of my life, the Lord was really just speaking to me very powerfully and very clearly. And so I just was writing everything. And so those ended up becoming poems, and I started getting into spoken word. And so I've been doing that for, I'd say, like 10 to 15 years.
So then I think the most obvious question, since we're here to talk about like faith, is when did you decide, or even if it wasn't so much of a decision, that you were going to start incorporating God and Christianity and the things you learned in your faith walk into your work in an intentional way?
So this is easy for me since it's so fresh and new. I don't really have to tap into my memory too hard there. Um, like I said, in 2020, so I started my walk again with the Lord. I grew up in a home where we knew the Lord, but I became a prodigal for a very long time. Came back in 2018 when I hit rock bottom. So I started through a program called Celebrate Recovery, and it just started reintroducing me to faith. And so it took me, I would say, like I said, about till 2020 when I started writing again. And it was mostly about my childhood. So there was not a whole lot of faith built in there. But slowly I started just noticing this natural pull to want to tie that into like the end of, say, a poem or a song or something that I was writing. It was almost like sharing the pain, sharing what the enemy intended to tear me down, but then bringing hope at the end. And every time I would do that, it was talking about what the Lord has done in my life. So, and I've seen this theme in all of my works in the last 2 years. That's kind of how I do it. Now I have many songs now written just talking about the goodness of the Lord, and it's all about that. But a lot of my story, I share the pain and then the hope. And the intention behind it really wasn't like, it was, well, I would say it was not like an intentional thing that I did. It was just a natural thing that started happening. And then I just really liked how that flowed. And the effect it was having on people when I shared it. That was the biggest thing, and how, on various platforms, people would approach me afterwards and saying how it really touched them and motivated them to seek deeper intimacy with the Lord and things like that. And that at that point, I'm like, okay, this is my form of ministry. This is what I am supposed to be doing to reach the lost or even the broken who do know Jesus, but calling them deeper into their faith. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. But I'm very intentional with it now. It's like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It wasn't so much a decision for me, Ellisa. It was more so just a natural expression. I think I think with any writer, I think it's very organic and very normal to write about the things that are most important to you. I think that happens naturally. So, or the things that maybe they might not be as important in a positive way, but maybe something that affected you very deeply, even in a negative way, that tends to come out in your writing. So, the way I see it is I'm doing the same thing as everybody else. I'm writing about what is most important to me. And so that is just what naturally comes out. Um, so that's really how it's always been. In the past couple of years or so, I have been more intentional about I'm trying to make a slow transition out of corporate America and into ministry. So over the past few years, it has become even more intentional, where I'm really trying to lay the foundation for how this is going to look like when I'm doing this full time. And I like what you said, Angela, about um, just the response that you get from people and the way that it is received. That I can really identify with that as well. That has been something that has been really inspiring to me and really just confirms that this is something that people need. So yes, it's becoming even more intentional over time. So
I think it's fascinating, mostly because I think my experience with faith and writing are very different in the sense that while I would like to say my work intentionally like celebrates the goodness of God, it mostly questions. So a lot of my relationship with God and just religion in general is very relationship based. And so and my pastor's doing like a whole series right now on like church hurt, and I faced a lot of bullying when I was a kid in church. So I always was able to separate the church from God because I always felt like God was good to me and the church not so much. But I also fell into a lot of my work asking questions of God, right? Like, so it's wanting him to explain things that didn't feel godly or look godly. And so a lot of my work don't have, of course, answers, but some of them just pose the question or pose hypothesis. And I think they've grown even over time, they've grown even more, I wouldn't say educated in their hypothesis, but Bible based in their hypothesis, because I found in college, I did like a whole semester that was just on like the first 3 chapters of Genesis, right? And so I got to dive into other people's interpretation of Genesis, the historical documents behind Genesis, the writers of Genesis, right? And so that during that class, I fell in love with like biblical study, which also exposed a lot of hypocrisy to me about people and their interpretations and how they weaponize the Bible sometimes. And as a result, I also wanted to talk about that in my work and separate God from Bible and Bible stories, and which feels so inauthentic in the sense that like God is the word and the word was God, right? That's like pure textbook, the first thing you learn, right? And I think so much of my time writing are really just meditations on things that like don't make sense to me. I think I have a piece called like Holy Walls, which is all about like and I wrote it in church. It was like if Jesus walked in here right now with his entourage, sandals, beard and all, right? What would these mother hens in the front row act like? How would they treat him? And so much of it was we have romanticized Jesus. We have romanticized the disciples. We have romanticized all of these individuals that really understand the space that they would have occupied in the time in which they existed, and how we treat the people in those spaces now. And I like to highlight that in my work. And that's definitely been a progression over time. And I've never gotten to the point where it's all about like, hallelujah, God is good. It's always about like people in relation to God and questions I have for God, and like meditating or working through them. I think I have one called Blasphemy that's all about being Black, being a poet, and being Christian, and how sometimes those identities conflict, and it's hard to make it all work together. How would you say your work over time, specifically your faith-based work, has evolved, has changed? How have the questions you're asking, the subjects you're tackling shifted? Pass it to Angela first.
That's a great question. And thank you so much for sharing all that. And I think that perspective is 100% needed, especially for those who have church hurt or who have been unchurched. I think that community is in desperate need of voices that can bring truth, like at the end of the day, which we know is the Bible. But those people don't want to hear that. And so hearing firsthand accounts and experiences and storytelling is just where it's at, especially for the younger generations. I mean, that's where my heart is, and that's who I've been called to reach. So I think when going into creating works of any kind, poetry, spoken word, books, songs, anything like that, anything in the literature space, I think you really want to have your audience in mind when you're writing that. And so for me, when I'm writing, that's how I'm inspired to know, I guess, the language I want to be using. The overlap, I mean, for me, it's like I already said, I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but I've come out of the wreckage, and I've experienced being at rock bottom and just genuinely seeing the darkest of the dark in this world. And I mean that. I don't ever go into detail because it's not my prerogative to re-traumatize myself or traumatize the reader or the listener, because that is crucial to keep in mind as well. But I think for me, there's a huge overlap, especially with that audience, because it's hard to have a faith when you've been through something so terrible. And when you've seen the worst in man and in the world, it's hard to associate there being a higher power that cares. It's just, I understand. I've been there. I know what it's like to be there. So I think for me, the part that I find, I guess, I don't know, overlapping doesn't seem like the right term here for me, but I think the message I would like to say for me is showing people that it's okay, like for you, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to sit in that space in between. The Lord calls us to do that. We're called to question. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be using our magnificent mind and critical thinking skills. That He's called us to use. That's why He gave it to us. So I think really it's just really important to be able to be real with your faith. And sometimes for me, it is just being authentic. I'm a storyteller. I'm always telling stories through my work. So I'm real. I'm like, I was this, but now I'm this. And I genuinely believe it's because of Jesus. But, if that's in my poetry, but when I'm like on a platform speaking, I'm authentic, and I'm like, I question daily. I question my faith daily because I've gone through so much trauma, and that has not stopped in my life. Just because in 2018 I found the Lord again doesn't mean life stopped happening and it did not become rainbows and butterflies. Um, I would say I've walked through more trauma since I started following the Lord than prior. And so I would say, when I say the goodness of God, it's in my internal mind. I know that's what I'm writing about, but hearing my works, it's saying nothing about that. It's all about transformation and all about, I'm sitting here contemplating suicide, but then the voice of truth starts speaking over my life, and then I share, Bible scriptures that speaks the life into the, or truth into the lies. So that's more so how my style is, and I guess overlapping some kind. So I hear my kids starting to rile up out there, so I'll stop there.
I think I also want to just double down before we pass it to Maiya on that importance of questioning, and how when you're writing faith-based stuff, the hardest thing to get over, especially before you perform it or share it, can be, okay, are people going to think like I don't care about God anymore, or I'm not Christian, or I'm doubting Christians in my work? And I think a lot of the time, the way I try and frame God, the character, I read a whole book recently about God as a character in the Bible, and so I thought it was they're interpreting that way, and it was really interesting because it shed a light on how I started to write about God in my work, which was trying to think of how He as a character plays a role in my life, and particularly how it ends up being so crucial that I think of God and view God as a relationship, as a friend, a father, right? Because with that lens, even if I don't like what he's doing, right? Like, I'm not loving this right now. Similar to how a friend takes you to a party that you're not loving or not excited about being at, you're gonna stay. You're gonna do what they ask you to do. You're gonna serve your purpose there because that's what you do out of love, right? For that person, for that friend. Similarly, here on Earth, even though I regularly say like Earth is ghetto, like I would not loving it. Great party to be at sometimes, but God put you here to serve a purpose. And as out of that love, right, out of that act of love for God, you serve your purpose while you're here, knowing that you're gonna have the car cranked up and ready to go to a much better place and a much better party at the end of the day. And so I think knowing that that's the spirit from which I'm coming from those questions with, right? Knowing that no matter God's answer, I'm still riding with God, right? Is the way that I get the courage to like go up on a stage or publish anywhere books like or pieces that have that kind of questioning element to them. Okay, I'll pass it to Maiya.
No, I thank you for sharing that. I think what you're saying is really, really important because as believers, when we even doing poetry, that's a way for us to have a spiritual conversation with someone, basically. So, or that's one way to do that in a more artistic kind of way. So what you're talking about is very important because people need to hear from a believer that it's okay to have questions. People need to hear that, you know, the Christian life is not perfect. Like you said, Angela, when you got back aligned with Christ, that didn't mean that all of your problems went away and there were no longer any challenges or struggles, or all of your trauma was erased, or like these are things that we need to be communicating to people whether they're believers or not. So I think there should absolutely be space for that, Ellisa. There's kind of there's lots of different ways that you can engage someone with the gospel or about their faith. And, sometimes it can be clear cut, like, this is who I was, and then I met Jesus, and this is how it's benefited me, and glory to God, and there's space for that. But there's also space for the nuance and the questions and the doubts. There's space for fear and, you know, uh, just being uncertain about certain things, or just kind of finding your way in your personal relationship with God. So I think that what you're saying is great. And I think that that's something that is very relatable to people, whether they're believers or not. And it really can help to um, just kind of bridge that gap between the person speaking and the person listening. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it's great that you are exploring these things in a way that you can invite people into that publicly, instead of just like keeping everything in your journal and this is just my private, struggle. But to be able to share that, I think is a really beautiful thing. Um, I think your question though was about what has evolved in your writing process over time. So for me, when I first started, um, I never made any decision to be a poet or to start doing poetry, or like that was never a conscious decision that I made. Um, I just got into a space where the Lord was just speaking to me, and I started writing down what he was saying. And I was able to kind of format it in such a way creatively that they turned into poems. And so at that time, it wasn't a choice to write. It was more of a response. Like the Lord was giving me something and I just wrote it down in response. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm setting aside writing time and I'm gonna spend, I'm gonna do 30 for 30 and 30 poems every month. It was none of that. It was just whenever the Lord spoke to me, then I wrote it down. But now I'm in a season where it's more so of a choice. So my writing process is it's a lot more academic, you could say. Um, when I'm preparing to write something, the process is actually the same as if I was writing, like if I was preparing a sermon or a lesson or something. The process is exactly the same. Only the output, the finished product, is different. So when I'm writing a poem, then I'm going to be studying. I'm going to have a Greek and Hebrew Bible dictionary. I'm going to be looking into commentaries. I'm going to be in the Word. You know what I mean? If I'm writing a poem about, I don't know, faith, then I'm going all the way back to the Greek and Hebrew, and I'm seeing what does that actually mean? How is it used in Scripture? If I'm coming from a particular verse, then I'm looking at commentaries on that verse, or I'm listening to sermons that break down that verse, all of that sort of thing. So just like if I were to be teaching someone a lesson on faith, that process is the same. The only difference is the finished product is more creative and it's in the format of a poem. So that's not how I started. I started just writing whatever the Lord said, and he's still speaking to me. It's just in a different kind of way. Um, I've I've grown spiritually. I've gotten older. I've grown in my faith, and so um, my approach is just a little bit different now. Neither one is better than the other. It's just a little bit different. I think that's okay.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's completely
I
okay.
was gonna say I can jump in and I did not touch on the process part at all. I guess I did a little bit as far as audience goes. Um, like how I keep in mind who I'm speaking to when I'm writing that piece. But um very much alike like you, Maiya, that the Lord, I would say I'm a prolific writer. So the Lord, I don't write until I hear from the Lord. And before, it was like I would just be doing whatever, say a bath. Like it always happened when I'm soaking in the bath. I would get a download, as I call it, and then I would write. And it was always almost the very first draft was the finished product, and I just knew like that was a download straight from heaven. Like there's no other question about it. Just especially when it's released and it's received by others, that's usually a confirmation, like you said earlier. Like that was good. That was really good. Now it has evolved. That was like 2020 kind of how it started for me. But now I'm pretty intentional, not in a sense of having outlines. Now, the book that I'm writing right now very much is like what you're saying. Like I'll make an outline, kind of, I know what flow I want the book to look like. Each chapter has its own outline. Like it's pretty structured, like a research paper, I would say, for me. Or how I would train somebody. You know, I'm an entrepreneur, so manuals that I've put together for employees and such. Like that's how I approach the book portion. But poetry and songwriting is still extremely prolific for me. But I'm intentional with it. So I go into my secret place, which sometimes that's the bath, sometimes that's my car, sometimes that's my closet. I really don't have like a specific prayer closet. I know some people do, but wherever I can be alone, because I've got 2 kids. So wherever I can go hide for a moment, and I just start with worship, and I do genuinely believing and praying in tongues, and speaking my prayer language, and allowing my natural mind and my natural self to just kind of melt away. And I feel like that brings like this immediate connection between me and heaven and the Lord, and it's almost like I become a conduit, and he can just, and a vessel, if you will, to speak through. And so when I get into that space, that's how it works. It just it starts flowing, and I start writing or I start typing, and then when I'm come out of that space, you know, I might go back in and rearrange some things, or speak it out loud and see if it flows in that way. And sometimes I'll have to tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, when I write that way, typically my first draft is the finished thing. And so I'm like, why not keep doing that? Because it's incredible. So the song that I'm releasing this summer, I shared it last night, a version of it. It's not going to be the exact version. That was written in one sitting. That was the first draft. The melody came to my mind. I don't play instruments. I don't do anything. I got the melody downloaded in my head. I did a voice memo, recorded it, showed it to this recording studio. And he's like, this is incredible. Like, nobody helped you put the melody together. I'm like, no. He's like, you don't play an instrument? No. He's like, do you know about like, and he did some like lingo. I don't understand, like key changes and like something else. He said I did something flips. I don't know. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He's like, wow, that's cool. So I just like, I'm gung ho, and I'm set on seek ye the kingdom first, and that's really what I do in all things that I do in life, but primarily writing, because that's where I'm being called to right now. So it's exciting.
You actually inspired another question in my head, because I think I have so many questions, you and Maiya. Is there a particular Bible character, Bible story, Bible verse, Bible message that you really want to write about or incorporate in some way, and just haven't really had haven't had it just come together in your head?
So I would say the book of John, obviously, is Jesus's ministry. I am obsessed, like, to put it short. That song that I shared last night, The Cure, is actually about a verse in John where he says, I am the vine, you are the branch. That song, The Cure, is about that. So it's talking about how when I stay connected to his vine, that brings the cure. And no matter what I'm facing, it brings the cure to my trauma. It brings the cure to my heartache, to confusion or depression, really anything, any life's ailments that we can face. As long as we're staying connected to his vine, we'll find the cure there. So I would say a lot of my album that I'm going to be completing is I'm titling the whole thing The Cure, and it's going to be on the book of John and just Jesus's ministry. I might tap into a few of the other gospel books, but really just the book of John. I'm so obsessed. It's so good. It's so good. I read it over and over and over every day, and I'm just like, this is just, if everybody could tap into this and just really understand what he's saying here, um, primarily about love, and how powerful love is. That's the other concept that that I write a lot about. I would say my book's gonna have hope as a theme and love as a theme, just how powerful love can be in this world, especially the climate that we're facing, and especially with the younger generations, like getting rid of condemnation, getting rid of shame, understanding what it looks like to live a life of loving one another. And that doesn't mean conforming, and that doesn't mean whatever, we can get into all those debates, but it's like love at the end of the day is the tool that we are called to use, period. And John says it pretty much in the first few verses. It's like the commandment of the New Testament is to love. So yeah.
That's awesome, Angela. And I can't wait to hear your album when you're done with it, by the way. That sounds awesome. I really love this question, Ellisa. I actually, for some years now, have been dying to write about heaven, like a literal experience of heaven. But because that is such a weighty topic, I don't want to do it unless it's going to be the best thing I've ever written so far. Like that is my standard for that poem. Like if you can't talk about heaven and be like it's kind of an okay poem, like, so I really need, in my mind, how I see this is that in an ideal scenario, I would need like a month or like 3 weeks to just spend time in the Word. Like I talked about the process a little bit earlier. So I would literally study the Word, look at every place that the Bible mentions heaven, like literally do research, study that, pray through it, work through it, and write from that. So I really want to kind of just step away from everything long enough to just lock in and just be in that space and study and read and write and without any distractions until it's done. So obviously that hasn't happened yet. So I would like to create some sort of solo writer's retreat where I can just be in that type of space and read and focus until it's finished. But I haven't been able to make that happen. But that is something that is at the top of my list that I will write about it. And my expectation for that poem is that I want it to be the best thing I've ever written. So one day.
No, I hear you there. I think, I guess my 2 cents on the question is I am obsessed so I connect the most deeply with God the Father of the Trinity. I don't know why. I think it's an easier figure for me to like conceptually connect with, and talk to and go to for guidance and wisdom. And so as a result, I love Old Testament because that's where we hear from God the Father the most. And also, he gets to be the biggest drama queen, like the whole time, like thunder, lightning, fire, mountains, like, okay, we got it. So he's great. And so as a result, I think it comes as no surprise. I love Genesis, like creation, and the pulling together of God's people, and that whole beginningness. Mostly because I think the people are so flawed. Like the people at the beginning that God chooses are so deeply flawed, and God loves them anyway. And they're some of His favorites, and I think that there's nothing more glorious than a creator who created you flawed, and loves you flawed, and has purpose for those flaws in His plan. And one day, I would really love, again, after that very deep study that Maiya is talking about, is to kind of pull together all of the threads that I see in Genesis, because I think this search for perfection has killed us, right? And that is not, and we make it so hard then for people to connect with Christianity, to connect with God, because they think either one, I'm not good enough, or I'll do it when I am good enough. And like neither of those things are necessary, and neither of those things will ever come. Like neither of them are true, right? You'll never be good enough, and the goal is never for you to be good enough. The goal is for you to be truly and utterly yourself, right? Abraham was meant to be himself. Noah was meant to be himself, right? They all have these very different character traits, and I think that I connect with, I don't know why, but I connect with those characters so deeply. And then outside of Genesis, of course, like Moses and the stutter, and you know, the people who didn't want the job, like I completely understand that. Like you sure I'm supposed to be here? Maybe not. No, okay, great, lovely, like it, great. I'll be here. I'll do it. But if you change your mind, also ready to jump left. Just saying. But that's how it feels sometimes being human, and trying to find God, and trying to, like, you know, there are times when some people talk about like God talks to me all the time. It's like great, and God talks to me a lot as well, but there'll be sometimes months where like I don't hear from Him, or don't hear from Him in the same way, right? And I really connect with those Israelites, being like, okay, dude, you were answering like 2 days ago, and I'm over here crying my eyes out. I need some answers, some help, some something, and can't get that connection, and to kind of somehow put into words the beauty of that relationship and how it differs from the other of the Trinity, right? Because like if God is the Father, Jesus feels more like a brother, and the Holy Spirit feels more like a psychic net, right? Like this kind of flowing entity that just kind of whispers around, right? That you can talk to and can take messages and pull together. So it all feels very different to me, but also like the openness that that's not how it has to feel for you, right? Like if you didn't have a strong father figure, I was like, that could be a very good reason why God the Father and that characterization of God doesn't connect to you, right? I had that, and so it resonates with me. But, and I've also had strong cousins, so the brother figure also connects, really resonates deeply with me. But that doesn't happen for everybody, and so you have to find your way that creates and makes sense to you. And so I want to take all of that I just said, that like very lengthy monologue, and somehow crunch it into a poem that's like straight to the point, heavy metaphor, beautifully laid out. And I'm not there yet, of course, as we can tell by the monologue. So one day we'll have it. But before we go, I want to thank you guys for coming, and I want to give you a chance to tell our audience how they can support you. Whatever, if you have an event coming up, if you have, keep in mind, this goes live Friday at 7:15. But if you have an event in mind or a website they can go to, social media they can follow, please tell them we love to support all of the people who come on the Inkwell Exchange.
Awesome, Ellisa. Yes, I can't wait. Actually, both of you, I can't wait to hear Perspective of Heaven. That's one of my favorite topics too. I've wrote a few pieces that I've not shared with anybody. And also, Ellisa, yes, I love it. It's so extra. The Old Testament. Oh, that cracks me up. I love it. Oh, I love it. Like I'm giddy over that. I love it. I started a series of it started as like the Lord just kept speaking to me about the different names of God, and I wrote a piece called El Roi, the God who sees. I think I shared it with you, but I can't remember if I did. But anyways, you have me going down this rabbit hole. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I started that and that. I need to go back to those. Anyways, so yes, I'm on social media, mostly Facebook and Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, Angela Harris-Thorne. Instagram is angelathorne.heals. Those are going to be the best way to follow my personal ministry, the works that I'm doing. I share a lot of my music, my poetry on there. And that's where I'll likely be using those platforms to talk about my upcoming single that I'm going to release called The Cure. It is a country worship song. And eventually, when I finish the whole album, it's going to very much be a country vibe. It is worship as well. So I'll probably have some featured singers on there with me as well. My daughter being one of them. She's an incredible singer and artist, songwriter, as well as my husband. He is a rap artist and he's incredible. So it'll probably be like a family album when it's all said and done. So that's my upcoming works. I do have a nonprofit. It's called Moses Movement. That's why I was cracking up when you're talking about all those that were called and were just like resistant. I really resonated when I first came into this space with Moses. His story is very aligned with mine, but in the modern world. So my nonprofit's Moses Movement. The website is mosesmvmt.com. I've got a short film documentary on there that you can watch and just stay tuned. I mean, that's kind of on pause right now, but I do hope to start launching my programs in the next couple of years sooner if the Lord says so. We'll have to see. So that's all the things that I have going on right now. Oh, yes. And I'm writing a book. The Lord told me that'll be coming out in June. So we'll see how obedient I am there. So that's going to be called A Path to Healing is the book title name. And it's going to be a mashup between my story, my life story, and education on trauma. So it's kind of like meshing. I thought I was writing two books. The Lord said, no, you're tying these in together. So somehow that's going to work. No idea how. Ellisa and I will figure that out when we start meeting soon. Thank y'all so much for being here and listening and sharing the platform with me to talk about our faith in writing. It's so fun. Thank you, Ellisa.
All right. So let's see. As far as upcoming events, I'm actually writing some new stuff right now. There's a show in August. Ellisa knows about this. It's by Artillery. And so it's a 3-part series, actually. The first one they've already had. The second one Alyssa's a part of, which I believe is in June. And then I'll be part of the final part of the series that's in August. I believe August 31st, the last Thursday in August. So that's going to be spoken word, it's going to be art, it's going to be live music. So that should be a really great show. Mark your calendars for that. As far as social media goes, you can find me on Facebook. It's just my name, Maiya Lewis. And if there are any Bible scholars out there listening, I've actually been studying for the past year or two. I've been getting into apologetics and learning about that. So there's a book that I'm going through and I'm reading, and just kind of sharing that information and sharing what I'm learning. That's on Facebook as well. There's videos there. I've done one for each chapter. So if that's something you might be interested in, doesn't have too much to do with poetry, but it may be helpful for you. That's on there as well. So again, the show in August, and I may show up at Black and Bitter a couple times between now and then. So we'll see.
Yes, if you don't know about Black and Bitter, last Friday of every month we are at Black and Bitter Coffee Shop, which is in Duncanville, Texas. Again, I tell you, DFW is popping. There are always amazing poets there. I am actually featuring at the next one. So, if you want to hear more of my work, or if you haven't ever heard my work, because I don't think there's much of it out there on my video form yet, but you can come out. It'll be a live little show, really a big show. Get there early. It ends up being standing room only almost every time. But I will, of course, not be the only poet, and it is put on by the amazing Mike Gwynn Entertainment, which I am happy to say Mike Gwynn, who I have alluded to and name checked a couple of times, will also be joining the Inkwell Exchange soon. So keep your eyes peeled on my social media for that as well. As always, I thank everyone for joining the Inkwell Exchange. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to these conversations. I hope you get a lot out of them. I hope they help you on your writing journey. Hope you connect with new authors that may be even more closely aligned to what you are trying to do. This is just one. Go back and check out the others. Also, if you are looking for, I don't know, anything from memoirs to children's books. Also have some fun romance authors coming down the line. So if it's not there yet, stay tuned, because I'm an avid romance book reader myself. Don't have the courage to write. But if you are looking for that, that will also be around. So stay tuned. All right, thank everybody for coming. And I will see you all the Saturday after this. Bye.
Thank you so much, Ellisa.